So next we have David Merriman and Alex Hawley to talk about Tier 2 and Safe Harbor. This is currently, as you know, a very hot topic. We've gone from no one talking about this to it's time to get to the bottom of it. David is a James J. Stuckel Presidential Professor at UIC. His focus is public policy, management, and analytics. He might not remember, but I have known David since I was employed at the Taxpayers Federation, which has been a number of years ago. Also speaking today is Alex Hawley, MPP, and he's a UIC graduate, a former student of Professor Merriman, and Alex is just starting his career.
I want to say that Alex is one of my superstar students, and he and I worked together last semester on a course about the economics of pensions. And as part of that course, Alex wrote a paper, which is very insightful about Safe Harbor and Tier 2. And so when I got the invitation from Linda to come, I thought, Alex actually knows a lot more about it than I do. And so he can be very helpful, and he enthusiastically took up the mantle. And I think Alex is just the kind of student we need going forward to help us untangle a lot of fiscal problems. So he's going to do most of the presentation. I'm just going to start with a few kind of introductory comments. So thanks, Alex. So probably many of you are familiar with these kind of basic facts. SERS, it used to be that there was kind of one main pension system for SERS called Tier 1. And of course, there were major problems with the funding of that. There's a lot of unhappiness with the kind of way that Tier 1 was set up. And so there was a major effort to kind of restructure pensions, and mostly restructuring pensions meant they were less lucrative. And so there was a Tier 2 introduced for the SERS pension system, and of course for all 5 of the pension systems in Illinois. And the new system post January 1, 2011 was called Tier 2. So many public pension systems like SERS have their employees contribute a set percentage of their pension plan. And for government employees, and pretty much government employees are the major group, they don't contribute to Social Security. They don't pay FICA taxes, and they aren't eligible for Social Security benefits. There's a long history about why this is true, but basically the federal government says, well, if you're not going to contribute to Social Security, you have to give a pension that's at least as good as Social Security. And so Tier 2 employees contribute 8% of their pensionable earnings to the pension plan. That's more than the FICA taxes. And they're supposed to get a return on that that's at least as good as the Social Security. So Social Security, SERS Tier 2 pension system are entitled to an annuity upon retirement. There's a lot of complex things about how that annuity can be structured. We're going to talk about it in very simple terms. And next slide, Alex, please. And so, Alex, I think you're going to take them through these basic facts, and then I'll come back at the end and talk a little bit more. But Alex will continue with the presentation. So thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Thank you, Linda, too, as well as SUA for having me. Very excited to be here. So before moving on to the more finer details of Safe Harbor, I thought it'd be a good idea to talk about how the Tier 2 annuity is calculated in general terms. And, once we expound on that, we can kind of see how that diverges from Tier 1 and how we kind of get into some murky territory in regards to Safe Harbor. So the annuity is calculated by multiplying 3 values. The first one is years of serviceable credit by the average salary over the top 8 highest grossing employed years by a benefit factor, which for SERS is 2.2%. That average salary for tier 2 is the top 8 highest grossing years. For tier 1, it's the top 4, and final average salary, which is abbreviated as FAS. Usually the understanding is the longer the FAS period is, the lower the FAS would be, just because you're taking a wider amount of salaries, including the 5th to 8th highest, which will be, of course, less than the 1st to the 4th highest. So by spreading out that formula, you end up getting a slightly lower final average salary, which is also one of the issues why tier 2 is a little bit less generous than tier 1. So to operationalize this, I created a sample employee, Sandra, who had worked for SERS for 25 years, had been a member of SERS tier 2 for 25 years. Of course, this is kind of a hypothetical because tier 2 just got started in 2011. Having had to vest for 10 years, this is somewhat in the future, but for all intents and purposes, we're going to take this. So the average salary over the last 8 years for Sandra was $85,500. So using those values, we come up with the annuity formula of 85,500 times 25 times 0.022, which would, upon retirement, produce an annuity for Sandra starting at $47,025. And then that would be adjusted, of course, by the COLA for each year. So how does Safe Harbor come in? So having that kind of overview of tier 2, we move into Safe Harbor. And Safe Harbor provisions have been a part of the Internal Revenue Code from the IRS since 1990, 1991. As David mentioned, they were really created to ensure that members of public defined benefit pension systems, such as SERS, would be able to receive a sufficiently generous benefit upon retirement. Since they were not contributing to Social Security, the federal government wanted to produce some regulations to make sure that those uncovered employees would be able to retire with a sufficiently generous pension. So, there wouldn't be issues of, poverty in retirement. So that sufficiently generous annuity needs to be at least what they would have received had they been enrolled in Social Security. And that kind of like counterfactual language, what they would have received, undergirds a lot of the Safe Harbor conversation, because you kind of have to compare the actual benefit annuity from the retirement system against a counterfactual amount that they would have earned had they been enrolled in FICA. And something to note as well, and Linda had touched on that very briefly in the introduction, is that Safe Harbor really hadn't come up in conversation until recent years. And that's really because even though it had existed throughout the 90s and the aughts, it wasn't really until the Great Recession and the years thereafter, 2010 to 2013, where states began to really kind of struggle with their pension plans. And many states like Illinois created second and or third tiers or levels to their pension plans, usually with less generous benefits, to begin addressing some of the ballooning unfunded liabilities that these plans began to experience. So a lot of you, I'm sure, are wondering, how might Safe Harbor impact me? Since SERS members are not eligible for Social Security, and those pensions need to satisfy the Safe Harbor clauses in the Internal Revenue Code, the federal government tried to create some simple formulas to use and assess whether or not a given public defined benefit plan was in compliance and would be able to produce an annuity. And these formulas measure two main things. Number one, making sure the benefits for a given employee were accruing at a set minimum rate. And then the second one, that the initial annual benefit would be at least as generous as a hypothetical Social Security primary insurance amount, so PIA, which I'll be referencing as well later in the conversation. So these two things, making sure the benefits were accruing throughout their time of employment, at least as quickly as they would be with Social Security, and then making sure that at the time of retirement, that the benefit would be at least as large as their PIA. As some of you might have known, Siegel, which is a large auditing, accounting, actuarial firm who does a lot of work with state pensions in Illinois, as well as county and city pensions as well, they released a report on June 5th to the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability, detailing possible risks that certain Illinois state pension plans may be exposed to. Their findings as it pertains to SERS is that the Tier 1 general benefit formula is definitely in compliance. However, the tier 2 formula does not satisfy the base formula on its face, and therefore individual testing may be required. So that means basically with their set percentages that they were using, the tier 2 formula after adjustments came in below that set percentage. So it's possible certain employees may be exposed to safe harbor violations. It's not saying that every employee will be, but it's just raising the possibility that perhaps some issue might arise in the future, depending on a given employee's employment history. So 2 main reasons why this is the case for tier 2 and not tier 1 get at how tier 2 is constructed and how it diverges from tier 1. So 2 main issues with tier 2 as opposed to tier 1 is that the full retirement age for tier 2 is 67 years old with at least 10 years of credit. So after 10 years, you fully vest in the pension and you're able to take your full allotted pension at 67. For each year earlier than 67 that you choose to retire, you take a 6% reduction to that gross annuity. And how that comes into play with safe harbor is that the safe harbor standards take the full retirement age of 65 years old. So we kind of have to back up the SERS tier 2 formula to 65. So in doing so, we take that 67 minus 2 years at 6%, which is a 12% reduction. So hypothetically, if a given employee was set to receive $10,000 as their initial annuity at 67 years old, at 65 years old, that $10,000 is reduced to $8,800. The second issue with tier 2 is that a max pensionable salary cap was instituted that was less than Social Security's. So that means any amount over that cannot be used as part of the final average salary calculation, and that kind of artificially reduces the maximum final average salary that could be used for a given employee below what one might pay into FICA had they been employed in the private sector or other public sectors where you would pay FICA. For 2023, those limits were $119,000 for tier 2 and $160,000 for Social Security. So that $40,000 difference also impacts that formula, as we'll see on future slides. So in thinking what might be needs to fix, we get to some of the recommendations that Siegel mentioned in their report. And one of the main things that they suggest is raising the pensionable salary cap to parity with Social Security. And how that would impact the safe harbor formula is such. Currently, as you can see on the screen, this first line is the current safe harbor formula for 65 years retirement for tier 2. So we have the initial gross 2.2% benefit factor. That's then multiplied by that reduction of 12%. And then we have to multiply that by a fractional value for the lower pensionable salary cap that is part of tier 2. And after all these calculations, that 2.2% is then reduced to 1.45%, which is below the minimum threshold for a plan like SERS set by the IRS as 1.75%. If SERS and other Illinois pension plans were to raise that pensionable salary cap to parity with Social Security, then this value would become 1, and we would just be left with the equation 2.2 times that 12% reduction, which would yield a value of 1.94%, which is above and would definitely satisfy a safe harbor, since that is larger than 1.75%. So Siegel did some actuarial projections and talked about how that change might affect budgeting moving forward. And they estimate that total cost for those 3 main Illinois pension plans for that adjustment would be $5.6 billion through the fiscal year 2045. It's kind of hard to create like a yearly value for that, because with inflation and actuarial recommended funding port costs for the state, that would change year to year. But while a large number on its face, 5.6 billion, it is only a 1.7 increase of the total pension costs over that same period of time. So while a gross number is quite large in terms of relative size, it's not that much larger than the gargantuan pension costs that the state currently experiences. Something that is definitely key to note in terms of the plan solvency is that there really wouldn't be any measurable effect to the funded percentage of the plans if these changes were undertaken, just because that cost is spread over that 23-22 year timeline, and it would be a fractional cost each year. I did wait to kind of show the safe harbor formulas to do the concepts first and kind of the nitty-gritty values second. But the base takeaway from this slide is that by removing the pensionable salary cap that is kept artificially below Social Security, the adjusted equivalent benefit factor would be able to supersede that limit set by the IRS. As part of the conversation, especially in Illinois in recent weeks and months, safe harbor has been talked a lot about and what that would even look like. There's been a lot of talk, but to this date, we're not really aware of any legal case or judicial proceeding that has used safe harbor provisions as a basis for a claim for additional benefits or back pay or the like. And it's kind of tough to tell what these legal cases might look like in the future. A lot of unknowns exist as to what the judicial or administrative procedures might look like that these challenges would create. But as has been mentioned many times in the Siegel report and in other conversations had, it really is up to the individual plan operator, so in this case, SERS or TRS or SERS, to make sure that their plans are compliant with the Safe Harbor IRS regulations. A final slide before I hand it back over to David is that, as you mentioned, we want to make sure that at retirement, a SERS employee will have a benefit that is at least as generous as what they would have paid had they been paying FICA into Social Security. In 2023, that maximum benefit for Social Security, if you maxed out your earnings throughout your entire employment career, was $43,000. If we go back to Sandra, early in the presentation, we used her as an example, a 25-year career, $85,000 final average salary. Her annual benefit was calculated to be $47,000. So just for that kind of average employee, she was 8% higher than the absolute maximum Social Security benefit, meaning she's definitely safe from Safe Harbor. As kind of an example of, it's not really every employee that's at risk, and the average employee probably isn't. In fact, for 2022, based on the SERS audit that was conducted, the average retiree in 2022 had a final average salary of $59,700, which is well below the pensionable salary cap. And as such, if that's not being taken into account, that benefit factor of 1.94% really for them would be above the safe harbor. So average retiree is probably not threatened by receiving a insufficiently generous benefit. There may be some conversation to be had about teachers or professors or other employees of SERS who have just vested, so around that 10 and 11 year employment mark. Further research is definitely warranted into that just after the vesting period. But an employee who has been with SERS for many years most likely would not be impacted, just because the longer you're with a tier 2 pension plan, you have an increasing benefit at an increasing rate. And to our knowledge, thus far, no SERS employee or other state employee in Illinois has been exposed to this kind of safe harbor violation. So it's definitely a conversation that's worth being had and being expounded upon. But at this point in time, it doesn't seem like a large scale worry. But again, it is just 11, 12 years after tier 2 was instituted. So, over the next 10 years, as these tier 2 employees begin to retire, that might be another issue that comes up. As an interest of full disclosure, I myself am now a tier 2 employee based in Chicago. So I do have some personal interest and curiosity into this issue. But with that, I will hand it back over to David for some final thoughts and takeaways, and then we can move into the question and answer if there's any questions from the audience. So David, take it away.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alex. And I think that was a great, I hope very clear presentation. Certainly helped me understand it. I guess, I think if you think about how concerned should you be, first of all, as individuals, and secondly, as a group, I think as an individual, I would imagine most of the people, I can't see the audience, but most of the people in the audience are probably going to be tier one retirees. The concern that you might have is, oh, what if the state has to spend a lot more money to fix the safe harbor? How is that going to affect funding for tier one? And will there be enough money to pay the benefits that I'm entitled to? Or will that be problematic? I think what we see is, the actual amount of money to fix the problem, to the extent there is a problem, is probably a relatively small percentage. And so you're probably not greatly at risk just in terms of dollars. On the other hand, I think one concern is now we've opened up a political can of worms. I mean, I think, anyone who was paying close attention at least knew that tier two was very, very different than tier one. And the benefits were much lower. And there was a lot of question about whether that was appropriate and just. And raising that issue politically, I think, could be a matter of concern. I think it should be a matter of concern to us. But how to fix it is, a question that will be raised again politically. If you think about it as an organization, from my discussions with Linda, SURS is meant to, SUAA is meant to be an organization that represents both tier one and tier two employees. And so to the extent that you want to appropriately represent tier two employees, safe harbor is certainly a consideration for as a sort of not only a matter of sort of fairness, but also basic legal compliance that the state has to make sure it can fix it. The question is, I think, as Alex mentioned, I think it's a very selective thing. Most tier two employees, and now I'm talking specifically about tier two, I think, and this is based on some work, some sort of more detailed fiscal work that Alex did for me last semester. The vast majority of tier two employees are not going to be affected by safe harbor. As he mentioned, the two special cases are people with very high salaries, so above the pensionable cap. And the other group are people probably with relatively short tenures whose pensions might not be sufficient. And that should be fixed. What the right way to fix it is something that I think SUAA could be helpful in sort of talking to elected officials about how's the best way to fix that. So those are my major thoughts. I think, I hope if you're a tier one retiree, you won't lose a lot of sleep about it at this point. But I think it is something that you should be aware of. So I'll stop there. And maybe we'll go on to the question section.
If you have questions, you could go to the microphone so they can hear you.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll probably have to turn the microphone on. So David, hold on, we're getting microphone.
Okay. Thanks.
Well, Kathy turned them off, so I know you have to turn them on. There you go.
Okay, my question would be, if someone is identified as not meeting the safe harbor when they retire, what then happens? What would the pension system have to do?
Yeah. So I understand the question. If somebody doesn't meet safe harbor, what do the pension systems have to do? And I think at that point, no one knows the answer, but is my understanding. I mean, we aren't lawyers, but it's something that really hasn't happened yet, as far as we know, or it certainly doesn't seem like it's happened in Illinois. Perhaps it's happened in some other circumstances. What the remedy would be, I think, first of all, this is the IRS, U.S. Internal Revenue Service, which probably would be the first group to have to say, okay, issue some ruling about what must be done. And then you can well imagine there might be a court case. As I understand it, it's the employer's responsibility to fix it. And then I guess there could be some question about is the employer the state? Is the employer, for instance, this goes outside of SUAA, but is the employer a school district? Who exactly is the employer? And who is responsible for fixing it? Does it come down to the pension systems, which technically are like independent of the state? I don't know, Alex, you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, and that's the issue, is that pension costs are shared across many institutions at different levels. So you have multiple kind of entities paying into pension systems. And moving back to the safe harbor provisions in the Internal Revenue Code, while a lot of the formulas are quite detailed, there really was no language whatsoever on recourse, or, if not, then what? It was more so just setting mandates. So from an administrative, procedural point of view, there, as David said, there really is quite a bit of doubt still in the air as to what the exact steps would be if a violation was proven.
My quick question was, could you send us the references to the Siegel report and for Alex's article? Do you have the full references?
Yeah, I think Linda has at least the PowerPoint, which has, we can send you more though. We can send you the report. Yeah, we can do that. We'll send it to Linda and she can get it out to you. Okay.
And there will be more coming of this. So.
And the second question is, there was a presentation in this body a couple years ago by SERS, where they clearly identified that they realized there were safe harbor problems with Tier 2. Have you, in any of your conversations, heard anything about what SERS is going to do about that?
I'm going to enter in here and say that SERS has done their own report. And I just heard it last week. I do have a copy of it, but they are not ready, I don't think, to release it to everyone yet.
It is disclosed. I mean, it's a public document, so anyone could request it. But the report was just recently published. It approved that report for release. I can talk at a very high level.
We're not going to talk about it today. We'll save you. I think SERS is going to do a presentation for SUAA at some point. It's fairly new to them and they kind of want to get their arms around it for a good presentation for everyone to understand. And Steve Rock might want to comment.
That's fine. My name's Steve Brock.
You got to turn your microphone on.
My name's Steve Brock. I also happen to be a trustee of SERS and asked its actuaries to do an analysis of the safe harbor issue. Kristen mentioned the report. It's now available. Our actuaries have some potential solutions. If you want to contact Kristen or SERS, get a copy of that return report. Basically, I think my understanding is that at least one of SERS employers is going to violate safe harbor by 2025. And that's going to cascade in future years. So it is important that we look towards the legislative solution. And I think our next speaker is going to talk a little bit about that. But if you have any more specifics, I'd be happy to address you individually.
And I'm going to also add in here that SERS is not endorsing any scenario for the purpose of the analysis that they have done, but they do believe that this information may be helpful in discussions about how to address Tier 2. And I think that that's what the Siegel report is out there too. It's just the beginning of many discussions to come. Go ahead.
Social Security is based on the best 35 years inflated for appropriate factors for cost of living. What if a professor does 20 years at the university, and then with some discovery he made, sets up a corporation and sells a product or a service? How will they integrate what the former faculty member earned in the, I'll call it the private industry sector versus his 20 years at an appropriate university?
if I can try and respond, I think what you're saying, and it doesn't have to be a professor, but anyone that paid into Social Security for part of their career, which I imagine, especially people with short careers, and actually, I'm an instance of that. I paid into Social Security for many years, and then I came over and have not paid into Social Security in recent years. And so, how do those two things balance out? I think, you know, I certainly don't know the answer to that, and from everything I've read, no one has really tackled that question of what does it mean to be equivalent of Social Security when part of your pension, part of your retirement is Social Security. I don't know, Alex, again, if you have thoughts on that, more thoughts.
Yeah, that's the issue, and that's one of the really great questions. Because even if you think about having, FICA paying career in their first half and then SURS in your second half versus the reverse, SURS in your first half and then private in the second half, those two career trajectories would take you in totally different directions with that initial annuity as well as Social Security. I think one thing to keep in mind is that Social Security is a very progressive retirement benefit. So for it increases a lot with the lower salaries, and then it kind of tops off. So it kind of has a graph like this, whereas tier 2 or tier 1 defined benefit public pension plan increases as your salary goes up and your years of service go up. So those two kind of different formulas of increase would also come into play. But to your initial question, a lot of doubt and confusion is out there, certainly, in terms of what would be equivalent. And that's why a lot of organizations and auditors like Siegel kind of use really, large actuarial averages to take that, just because it'd be close to impossible to figure out on an individual by individual basis what kind of situations may arise, in which case safe harbor would be violated.
Hello, my name is Michael. My name is Larry Plata. I'm a treasurer of SUA State and then also treasurer of our chapter at UIC. Anyway, by your example, Alex, you indicate that Social Security maximum for your example was $43,500 some odd dollars versus tier 2 $47,000, etc. Anyway, so the Social Security is 1.4% less. However, we're paying 1.8% more, and that's supposed to be matched. So it's like, there still is a disparity here that I think needs to be addressed by our various governments. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Excuse me. That's absolutely correct. I'm going to hand it over to David really quickly after. That conclusion is correct. The issue with safe harbor, though, is that it has no provision for kind of keeping that equal. So that there's no provision in safe harbor for COLAs or for contribution rates. So while those, of course, are issues that would impact your retirement, in terms of a legal argument, it's not quite there in the code yet. But of course, rationally, absolutely correct. David?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there's nothing, the federal government isn't saying that the pension has to be a good deal. They're just saying it has to be at least as good as Social Security. So, that's a different battle, I'm afraid.
And that's the issue with the defined benefit plan rather than defined contribution, because the benefit percentages are liable to change as long as that benefit that is promised is reached.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Speak into the.
Okay, can you hear me?
No.
Mine is not a question per se, but Social Security, to give you an example, on our campus, we had a person that worked for 27 years and paid into Social Security, and then came to our institution. Well,
that are in the tier 2 plan. They're older, will retire probably soon. And it wasn't until later when she started in the tier 2 plan and had all the Social Security to realize that in Social Security, by doing what she did, unless she goes to 30 years in Social Security, she's gonna they're gonna take out a ballpark figure of 40% of her Social Security because we came into a university setting. Yeah, so basically, the rule of thumb that we've been doing is it's about a 40% takeaway from your Social Security. So let's say, and I was one of those that paid into Social Security at one point in time. And so when it came for me to retire, and I retired from SIU Carbondale, my Social Security part was basically 40% less. So if you're having people coming in with those scenarios, which I think you also need to address, especially for 2-tier people, because what we're talking about here is that they were in tier 2 their whole time period without these other things. I think you also, or we need to, in different scenarios, let them know that as well. And you might not like that, but you know, tier 2 has this. So if you got people coming in, and it used to be in resource offices, lots of times they would at least give that information. I can tell you that SERS, when it does come out, does a pretty good job letting people know about that in their presentation, and they do that. Okay, but if people don't go to those, they don't have that information. So, you know, there's a couple of things going on at least with that.
And I'm going to jump in here and say, at one time, I know that people were hired without any of that knowledge, but then at another point, there were some campuses who made or had people sign a form saying that they were provided that information. However, they forget.
Well, I just want to say, you know, I study this stuff for a living. I have an incredible amount of training about how pensions work. I can't figure out for certain what benefits exactly I'll be entitled to when I retire. So I think, you know, that tells me that the system is too complicated, right? And all the things you mentioned are very, very valid, and people are trying to figure it out. It's just too hard to figure it out. I don't know what the solution is. I certainly don't have the solution, but I think a more unified national system of pensions kind of makes sense. And you know, if we had it to do all over again, I would like to go back and say all government employees have to be on Social Security. You know, having a system where some people are and some people aren't it's entirely too confusing. That's just my own personal view.
Yeah, but what you're dealing with, the federal government, the Social Security versus the states. And,
Right.
And
Our municipalities.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got 2 more questions and then that's it.
John Prochaska, UIC. I've been a student of Social Security for many years. I had 17 years of university service and a total of 30 years on the Social Security. I had no reduction in my Social Security, and the reduction factor is 5% for every year that you're short. So it's not 40%, it's 5% per year would be the reduction that you would get to your Social Security if you only had the 27 years.
Could people not whisper because it goes through the microphones and we're recording? Please, thank you.
I think Mike covered. I think it's really important that this presentation be taken for what it is. It's a presentation about safe harbor. This is not about the government pension offset. It's not about the windfall provision. All that they provided is a very good presentation about tier 2 and the safe harbor provision. As soon as you become eligible, as soon as you become vested for a pension under CSRS, it's going to affect at some level your Social Security pension that you've earned unless you meet that 30-year threshold. But that has nothing to do with the safe harbor provision.
Thank you. That's absolutely right.
Okay, thank you, David and Alex. I have one quick question for you, and that is, how unusual is it for a state, most states I'm familiar with offer concurrent participation with Social Security and the state retirement benefits, and therefore this isn't an issue. How unusual is it for a state like Illinois that does not offer that for its major retirement systems?
I don't have the numbers. It's not that unusual. I mean, I would say roughly 20 or 22 states is what I think I've seen in the past. I don't know, Alex, if you have the exact number.
I don't have an exact number, but I know states, just off a quick Google search, because I know I have been reading this in articles here and there. Alaska, Colorado, Louisiana, Maine, Massachusetts, Nevada, and Ohio are not part of Social Security. So there are definitely pure states of Illinois who do not involve their public employees in Social Security. However, there are even some state pension plans in Illinois or municipal plans that very small niches or subsets of their employees do both. So it's not a Illinois blanket. It really is just kind of the exception to the rule.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you, David and Alex. Really appreciate your presentation.
Thanks a lot. Nice to be here. Bye-bye.